Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we are continuing with our ChiBi Let's Talk Lore series. Last episode, we left off with a thud as Zhang Fei roared 3 times at Cao Cao's army. It turns out that this thud was caused by Cao Cao's general Xiakou, who, as you can tell from his Xiakou surname, is another distant relative to Cao Cao. And being Cao Cao's relative gave him a job as one of Cao Cao's guards. But Xiakou had poor health growing up, and hearing Zhang Fei's roar struck so much fear into him that it ruptured his gallbladder on the spot, which instantly killed him. Now, you know why Zhang Fei in the game has the ability to lower enemy morale by a full 100 points. And the thud that followed was the sound of him falling lifelessly off his horse. So the combination of Zhang Fei's roar, the thud of Xiakou falling off his horse, and witnessing Xiahou's death on the spot proved too much of a shock for Cao Cao, as he turned his horse around and started galloping away from Zhang Fei. Now, of course, the sight of the fleeing Cao Cao is going to cause a massive and confusing rout by the rest of Cao Cao's forces, who largely have no clue what's going on. At this point, Cao Cao was simply in shock, as he rode non-stop at a full gallop, to the point where his headpiece fell off, causing his hair to flow wildly in the wind. It wasn't until Zhang Liao and Xu Chu rode up to him and grabbed a hold of Cao Cao's horse that Cao Cao was able to snap out of his panic. Zhang Liao reassures Cao Cao and says, "Prime Minister, it's okay. No one is chasing us. Zhang Fei is just one man. If we rush him and take the bridge, it's over for Liu Bei." Cao Cao calms himself down and agrees. But just to be doubly sure, he sends back Zhang Liao and Xu Chu by themselves to ride back as scouts first, while Cao Cao rests and reorganizes his army. Meanwhile, back at Changban Bridge, Zhang Fei is delighted that he had pushed back Cao Cao's entire massive army just by himself. He rides back across the bridge, stops his 20 riders from riding back and forth, stirring up the dust, and tells them to go burn down the bridge as he retreats back towards Liu Bei's position. Speaking of Liu Bei, we must remember that in the last episode, we also had Zhao Yun carry little baby Ado through countless hours of fighting in order to get back to Liu Bei. So let's find out how Zhao Yun was received by Liu Bei, and if the little baby boy survived all the chaos. So when Zhao Yun finally reunites with Liu Bei, he quickly stumbles off his horse and embraces his lord, and cries to tell Liu Bei that Lady Mi was too wounded to move on her own, and while he offered her his horse, she refused and instead chose to suicide down a well to ensure that Zhao Yun had a chance to escort Liu Bei's firstborn son out of the battlefield. Now this is especially touching, as Lady Mi was not actually Ado's mother. Lady Gan, who survived the battle, was Liu Shan, or Ado's birth mother. So Lady Mi made the ultimate sacrifice herself, protecting her stepson. Then Zhao Yun unties the cloth that he was holding Ado in front of his chest and checks on the baby, who has not made a sound for a while, fearing that the baby might have not made it through the battle. Zhao Yun checks quickly for a pulse and was relieved to find out that Ado has actually fallen asleep in front of his chest. Happy that he at least completed this part of his mission to protect Liu Bei's family, Zhao Yun hands Ado to Liu Bei. Liu Bei quickly takes his son and immediately throws the baby to the ground as he grabs onto Zhao Yun and says, "This baby almost cost me a great general." Zhao Yun picks up the baby, presents it back to Liu Bei again, and swears his eternal allegiance to Liu Bei. So this throwing the baby part of the story is actually quite famous and funny. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it from a few angles here. Objectively, Liu Bei should have valued Liu Shan immensely, as Liu Bei was in his 40s, and this was his first and only son at the time. But Liu Bei is also well known for abandoning his family, as he has lost his wives multiple times. Even during our lore series, our last one about Guan Yu was about Liu Bei losing his wives. And since he's been on the losing side of so many battles, he has lost his wife countless times too. But regardless, Liu Bei probably still valued this son a lot, given that it was his heir, and the only heir he had at the time. So historically, this throwing the baby event definitely never happened, but that's material for our next episode, which is our historical bonus episode. So let's back off from history for a second and just quickly assume that everything in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms novel is factual or at least canon. Then we can find another few interesting facts around this event. From the baby's perspective, Ado or Liu Shan grows up to become the eventual second emperor of the Shu Han kingdom after Liu Bei's death, and becomes a well-known inept ruler. He wasn't stupid, but he was kind of dumb in a way. So perhaps we can attribute his lack of abilities and mental capabilities to a childhood where he suffered through severe trauma and concussion because he was riding with Zhao Yun for several hours in an intense fight, followed by a WWE submission move by his own dad just to buy the loyalty of everyone's favorite general, Zhao Yun. But that's probably not the reason why he was inept, and he probably didn't suffer much from here, because if we notice on a key description about Liu Bei, when he was first introduced in the novel, this throwing the baby part might actually not hurt as much as you would think. The angle here we have is that when Liu Bei first appeared in the novel, his physical appearance was described in great detail. There were two things that stood out about Liu Bei. One, he had giant earlobes that draped all the way to his shoulder. And he also had very long arms that when he put his arms around his side, his hand touches past his knees. Now, these two physical anomalies and many other odd anomalies about physical appearance has been routinely used in Chinese history on various characters to symbolize that that person is destined for great things. And it kind of makes sense because the logic here is that a normal looking person will follow a normal life, and if you look weird, you must be destined for something different. But if we ignore his gigantic earlobes and pay attention to his arms, then we know that when he stretches arms out, it goes past his knees. So if he had just grabbed the baby with an outstretched arm from Zhao Yun, who's on his knees, and then drops the baby to the ground, then it might just have been a foot-high drop. Probably wouldn't have hurt the baby at all. Now, conversely, we can look at this the other way. If he had super long arms and he grabbed the baby, raised it above his head and threw it down, then we probably don't even have Liu Chan anymore. So that's another way to look at things. And that's enough of a side there. That was just something I want to get off my chest. I always found this story to be funny, that Liu Bei threw the kid to the ground. And let's get back to our main story. As Zhang Liao and Xu Chu reports back to Cao Cao that Zhang Fei is nowhere to be seen now, and that the bridge has been burned down. Hearing this, Cao Cao suddenly becomes confident that Zhang Fei was just bluffing. So he turns his army around and orders his men to erect 3 bridges quickly so they can chase and catch Liu Bei once and for all. Meanwhile, Zhang Fei returns to Liu Bei as well and reports back that he yelled at Cao Cao's army and they just ran away, and explained that they're all safe now because he burned down the bridge, which makes Liu Bei super worried as he tells everyone to pack up and run. Zhang Fei is confused and asks his brother, why do we have to run now? Cao Cao just ran away. Liu Bei tells Zhang Fei that if he had left the bridge intact and just reported back, then Cao Cao, who is prone to overthink things, might actually believe they have an ambush and is not afraid of them chasing over the bridge. But now, since you burned the bridge down, Cao Cao definitely knows we're bluffing, so we gotta run now. But unfortunately for Liu Bei, their group didn't get very far because they had many wounded with them before Cao Cao's vanguard unit enclosed in on them in a circle. And just as Cao Cao's forces were about to surround Liu Bei and capture them once and for all, another force came from Cao Cao's flank and charged into Cao Cao's unprepared men. Leading the way of this newly arrived force was none other than Guan Yu, who had finally returned with 10,000 men borrowed from Liu Qi. Even though Cao Cao had far more men, the sight of Guan Yu's surprise flanking maneuver struck fear once again in the ready jumpy Cao Cao. Cao Cao, being the person who overthinks things, now becomes convinced that burning the bridge was just a step in Zhuge Liang's grand plan, and it was a next level mind game played by Zhuge Liang to trick him first with Zhang Fei to give off the appearance of an ambush, and then burn the bridge on purpose to give the appearance of no ambush, and then hit him with the actual ambush here. So he turns his men around once again as they run off the battlefield. So with Cao Cao officially gone, Guan Yu reunites with Liu Bei as their force runs farther south towards the Yangtze River, for they know that they don't have any men left and that this was it. But just as they reach the river, a fleet of ships blankets the coastline to welcome them. Not expecting company, Liu Bei gets a bit fearful as he prepares himself for yet another battle against potentially Cai Mao's navy or perhaps Wu's navy. But luckily for him, it turns out this naval force was commanded by Liu Qi and Zhuge Liang as they get off the boat and welcome them onto the ships where they can finally ride safely away from Cao Cao's forces. They retreat back to Jiangxia, where Liu Qi is garrisoned in, and take control of Xiakou as well as they prepare for round 2 of Cao Cao's invasion, while Cao Cao regroups his force and adds in the newly surrendered Jin province's forces as he makes final preparations for the ultimate showdown with Liu Bei and Sun Quan in the Battle of ChiBi. And this concludes part 1 of our ChiBi trilogy. This series will take a small break tomorrow and resume Friday with a bonus historical episode. Then starting next Monday, we'll continue with part 2 of this trilogy as we finally get to talk about Sun Quan and Wu and the actual battle at ChiBi. So thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye!